who've been to previous meetings before have heard my lecture about why companies need a business development person, why you need somebody from the business development side to guide you through. Not every company can afford to have a business development guy full-time on staff. So what do? Well, when I have a plumbing need, I hire a plumber. When I need electrical work done, I hire an electrician. And when I need some business development assistance to get my company going, well, I hire Jay. You're on.
So are we good? Is it me now?
We're good.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jay. We're gonna, let's see if I can go back to the other one. Nope, can't. All right, whatever. It's late here. Pardon me. So my name's Jay Powell. I've been on the business end of the industry now for 20 years. I spent my first 7 or 8 years as an agent, and some of the first companies that I worked with were Dice and Paradox, People Can Fly, several others that I probably can't remember off the top of my head, but I've been doing this for a long time. So after the agency days, I worked as biz dev for a publisher. You know, I did the acquisitions, I set up the digital distribution networks, did that for 3 years, and then left and started this company. And so the Powell Group is a consulting firm that handles biz dev, licensing, and marketing consulting for everybody from indie devs to AAA devs, publishers, service providers, conferences. We cover a lot. More pertinent to you all is about 1.5 years ago, we started the Indie Game Business Initiative. And it just simply came from the fact that I was giving a lecture in LA one day, and I said, you know, you need to qualify your publisher. And then I went on to the next slide, and somebody raised their hand and said, what do you mean? And I went, what do you mean? What do I mean? I was like, oh my God, you really don't know what I mean. And it just clicked that me and my team, we have been doing this for so long that we had knowledge that we assumed everybody else had. That wasn't the case. So that, you know, we stirred on that for a little while. But last year we started, well, actually, no, 2 years ago now, we started a Twitch show called Indie Game Business. The reason is because, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of the stuff about how expensive GDC is going to be this year. They've jacked up the rates. I saw somebody complaining that a hotel near the Moscone Center that usually goes for $150 a night was going for $600 a night during GDC. A lot of you, frankly, that need to be at that show and need to hear the lectures and the knowledge that's coming from it, you can't afford it. I mean, and hell, there's times I can't afford it. If you're going to go to GDC and really get everything, you're going to drop $5,000, $10,000. And so we said, well, we've got Twitch and streaming and all this technology. Why don't we just bring that knowledge to everybody else? And that's what we've been doing for the last 1.5 years. So we do a podcast twice a week. You can just Google Indie Game Business. We're on Apple, Spotify, and about 9 other platforms. We do free webinars. We did one today on how to find an investor. We've got one coming up on Thursday on how to find a publisher. And that all, you know, stems from this big list of publishers that we just released again today. And I sent it to Larry. So if y'all don't have it, it's completely his fault because he has it. But we basically sit down and we track over 650 publishers. And so we put that all on a list and we send it to people. And, you know, if you want to learn how to take that list and turn it into a biz dev plan, that's what we do in that webinar. And so there's a lot of things like that. We do an online, you know, matchmaking event. So instead of spending $5,000 to go to GDC, you can drop less than $100 and meet a lot of the same publishers in one-on-one video conferencing. The Powell Group is the actual company. Indie Game Business is my hobby that's gotten out of control, I'll say. But the whole point of it is to educate everybody and to let everybody know, what they need to do to be successful in games, because I get the same phone call now that I got 20 years ago, and it's the developer calling me saying, hey, we're launching our game next week and we haven't done any marketing and we don't have a budget for it. How can we get the word out and how can we make our game successful? And you can't. You pick a god, start praying. That's my best case scenario for that situation. And so every time we get a developer that comes to us and says, hey, we're pretty early, but we want to start thinking about the marketing, I'm just like, yes, we've reached somebody. So tonight, this evening, wherever it is y'all time, we're going to go through the 4 main scenarios that you're going to find yourself in as a developer. And we're going to walk through all the stuff that you're going to have to do to be successful, not necessarily to scare you, but to just make sure to make yourself aware. So if you have questions at any time, Larry, I know your mics are charging, but you can feel free to interrupt me. And if you've got the computer that's running Zoom, there's a Q&A button on there. That's usually the easiest way to grab me and get my attention, because I know that we've got a few folks who aren't necessarily in Vegas out there watching on the internet as well, because I posted this in our Discord, just to let everybody know. So with all that said, let's get started. The basics. I mean, this isn't hard. This isn't something you can do on a part-time basis if you're going to make your game successful. It's time consuming. You're constantly shooting at a moving target. Sometimes that target disappears completely, and sometimes it ends up on the other side of the screen. It's always moving. And then you get up the next day and you do it again. So let's see if I can figure out one of my controls here. Here we go. All right. So we don't generally put biz dev in a little silo by itself. When you're doing this as a developer, there's 3 main parts that all have to work together, and they feed off each other. You've got your business development side, which is the actual outreach to publishers or to licensors or, to Steam or GOG or Nintendo or whoever it may be. You've got the marketing side of it that is actually promoting the game generally to consumers, because you have to do a bit of that before you even start doing the publishing side as well. And then you've got the community management, which maintains that, that core interest in the game. So all 3 of those have to work together, and I've got this deck later. I mean, I can send this over to Larry, or Larry, I think you already have it. But, proper marketing is going to yield interest, and that's going to be consumers, influencers, publishers. That community then helps, grow in and of itself. That's going to yield a big Discord server. It's going to yield wish lists on Steam. It's going to show the publishers that people actually care about the game. Your community can also, help you with customer service. We did an interview with Megacrit last year about, Slay the Spire. Slay the Spire is localized into about 20 different languages, and it's all done by the community. And so they were able to really build, foster, and empower their community, and it's turned out to not only save them money, but, make them a ton of extra money as well. Your community can also, they're going to be tweeting and retweeting and bringing new people in. All of this, is going to help you down the road when you start reaching out to publishers. I had a publisher today come back and ask us about one of our clients, and it wasn't, what's the budget or what platforms is it going to be on? It was, how many wish lists do they have so far? And that's the way a lot of these companies think now. Sorry. So keep in mind, you've got to start marketing from day one. The minute you have something to show, a screenshot, a GIF, whatever, that's when you're going to start, your marketing plan. You've got to start building that community around your game immediately. There is an excellent set of articles on Gama Sutra from Justin French. We had him on the show as well, so there's actually a podcast episode with him. But he has several articles about how to, use Discord to build a healthy game community, and how everything that they do for NeuroSlicers points back to Discord, and it's their hub for all their marketing and community management. And then you always have to have a backup plan, for going to market. If you're one of these, let me see the situation. Yeah, all right, our scenarios are next. So if you're in that scenario one where you're building a game with the intention of finding a publisher, you always in the back of your mind have to have a plan for if you need to self-publish. And maybe you don't have enough money to get it all the way to the end, but you're going to do early access. You always have to have this stuff in the back of your mind. So the four main areas that we're going to talk about, the scenarios that you're going to end up with as a developer, is you're building the game with the intention of finding a publisher. That's traditional indie route. We're going to sink a year of this, our time into this, 6 months, however long. We're going to get something that's solid and ready to show to a publisher, and then we're going to go out and find one and get them to finish the funding and all that sort of good stuff. Scenario two is you're building a game that you plan on self-publishing. You can get it all the way through in terms of funding, but you're going to need to have the distribution network set up. You're going to be doing your own marketing. You're not going to have that publisher support. You're going to do it on your own. Scenario three is developers that focus on contract development deals. And this is, these types of studios have been our clients for years, because one of the things that we do is go out and help them find, RFPs and contract opportunities. But that's a different set of obstacles that you're going to have to, tackle, that we're going to get into. And then scenario four, which is one of the most popular, but one of the most absolute dangerous. It's we're going to make our own game, but in the meantime, we're going to work on contract development to, pay the bills while we're getting it done. All right. So we've already got a question coming in on Zoom here. Victor says, I showcased my game at DreamHack Atlanta last year. It was a crazy time. We were in a crappy spot, but I made the best of it. I'm going to PAX South next week. We seem to have a good spot. Regardless, I'm debating on doing further conventions until game launch. I have opportunities to go to DreamHack Anaheim, PAX East, GDC, South by Southwest. Victor, you got a nice travel budget. Obviously, these events are great, but they take time and money. Let's see, hold on. Anyway, exposure is very low. I definitely need to market, also looking at PR companies, but how do you balance it with development itself? How many is too many conventions before launch, or is there no such thing as too many? All right, so I had to get through that because I wanted to make sure I didn't forget it. But Victor, we're going to go through that. And the short answer is yes, there's absolutely too many. There is a too many button in there. All right, so scenario one. This is where, you're working on that project. You don't have the funding to take it to market, or in some cases, maybe you do have the funding, but you don't have the experience. You may have the experience but not having the funding. Either way, you're going to have a publisher. So first is that high level strategy, the things that you're going to have to do along the way internally. You're going to have to build consumer interest in the game. Even though you're going for a publisher, you still need to build that interest. You've got to build professional confidence that you can actually finish the game. You're going to have to pitch it to multiple publishers, and you're going to have to secure the financial and marketing support that you need to succeed. So how do you do that? When you're building the consumer interest, this is where you've got to start with that day one. Social media is your friend. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, hashtag, talk to other, developers. There's been an explosion with the hashtag of the Indie Dev World Order. Discord is actually, we use it internally for a lot of biz dev stuff. But you need to build that consumer interest through your social media, Reddit, and then, like Justin says, and I can send that link later, to let y'all know where it is, but point it all to your Discord server. That's going to save you time, because then you can actually manage and talk directly to a lot of your fans without having to spread it across 16 different platforms. So how do you build professional confidence? What a publisher wants to know once they look at your game and go, hey, I like this, is can you finish it? And that's going to be key. You've got to build the groundwork along the way that you know what you're doing. You want that publisher to be able to get your game and then do a Google search, and automatically stuff comes up. It's like, okay, they've been talking about this, they've been doing that. Here's some screenshots, and here's some, dev updates on what they've been doing. But this is where you go and you write Gama Sutra articles, you write on LinkedIn. And if you're not on LinkedIn as a dev, if you're doing the BD side of it, you have to be. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Make sure you're posting on LinkedIn. Build a demo that showcases the best part of your game. There's not a easy scenario and an easy recipe for a great demo. You want to make sure it shows off those unique selling points that you have, and you want to make sure that what you're showing is polished. A lot of people may say that, oh, it doesn't matter what the graphics look like, they just want to see the core game loop. Bullshit. Everybody wants to see, pretty pictures along the way. And depending on the publisher that you're pitching it to, you may be pitching to somebody who's not even a gamer. So you can't even go in and say, oh, well, it's like Breath of the Wild meets Metroid. They're not going to know what that means. You've got to show them. So that's the professional confidence side. Just always keep that in mind when you're going to these publishers, is they want to be 100% comfortable that you're actually going to finish this game. So, then you've got to actually, then you got to actually research your targets. So this is one of the things that we do in the webinar that we're going to be doing on Thursday. There are 600 and I believe 89 publishers in our publishing list. There are a lot of companies out there. No, you're not going to send your game to 600 of them, but that's the level of options that you have as a developer. And so, we get developers that come to us a lot and they're like, man, we shopped our game everywhere and nobody wants it. And I'm like, how many people did you shop it to? And they're like, 20 or 30. I'm like, well, you missed about 300. But aside from that, you're doing great. There's a lot of, companies out there, and you've got to do that research. So find who your targets are, determine the best way to reach them. And there's, some of them are going to respond more to email. Some of them are going to go to Twitter. I saw the guys at Superhot. They had a tweet this morning. This is, because Superhot's doing publishing now. And they're like, we're still looking for stuff. Send us games. So you've got to really be out there and finding the best way to go about it. And most every publisher out there has a Discord server now for their community. If you can't find a contact, that's a good place to go. Go to their Discord server, look to see who the admins are, or they may even have like people from the company. That's a wonderful way to find folks. I mean, I can give you an example right now while we're live here. If I go over to our buddy at Akupara, and you'll see in the webinar, I pick on Akupara a lot. Not pick on them. I love those guys. This is Akupara's Discord server right now. Staff. Okay, so David's not on there. Yeah, he is. So right there. If you're on Discord, you can send a message to the CEO of Akupara. He's right there online on their Discord. So don't discount these things that are generally looked at as just community management, or this is just where the fans go. You can do BD through these areas as well. So do that, and then follow up and take good notes. I mean, whenever you're going about this, you always need to have a CRM solution, ideally, and they're cheap. You don't need Salesforce. You just need something, that's going to basically keep track of information so you can look at emails and you can send yourself messages. But follow up, take good notes, understand this publisher's looking for XYZ, this one's not, because that's going to help you down the road. Hopefully, this is not going to be the only game you're pitching. You're going to have a whole line of these over the next 50 years. So the more data you can build up, the more information you can keep track of, the easier your life is going to be. I know my entire company is built on 20 years of CRM data. That's what we do. So, then you actually had to close the deal. And that's the part that gets tricky for a lot of devs. But when you have multiple companies interested in what you're doing, you've got to find the best partner. You've got to sort through what your options are, what they bring to the table, what the best parts of what they're doing is, what the worst parts. You've got to pick, you've got to find the right one for you. You've got to be able to negotiate your contract. Now, you need a lawyer. Let me be very crystal clear on that. You're going to need a lawyer, but there are a finite number of lawyers in the industry or lawyers in the world who are good at the industry. So, we don't have a lawyer on staff. And I tell every client that we have, you're going to need a lawyer. I'm going to work with them. I'm going to give them the business case. They're going to make sure it's legal in the contract. But you're going to need somebody to do that, and you're going to need a good understanding of what the latest norms are in contracts. And there was a really good article on Gama Sutra right before Christmas, I think, about, this is what a great publisher developer relationship contract looks like. And, it was a good one, but that's not going to be everybody's situation all the time. Then you need to negotiate a deal while you're doing that contract that works for everybody. When you're doing game development and you're working with a publisher, your mentality should not be going in, okay, I'm going to win this negotiation. It's a partnership. You both got to, be doing the right things for one another, helping and supporting one another. And if your attitude going in is that you're going to demolish this publisher in a negotiation, that's going to turn bad. And the same is true from their side. If they're being overbearing, I always tell our clients that contract negotiation phase is a very good tell, because if they're difficult to deal with, then that situation is not going to get better over time. That's the way it's going to be for the entire partnership. We've had clients even just recently where, financially our company has lost money because I told our client, don't sign that contract. That's not a good contract. This publisher is not dealing with you in good faith. This is just bad. Walk away. And they did, luckily. But don't think about it. You've got to realize this is a partnership all the way through. So scenario 2, this is where you're working on a game and you're planning on self-publishing it. Now, if you're going to do this scenario and if you're going down this route, I highly recommend this not be your first game. Your first game, you need to find a partner. You need to learn from that partner. You need to understand all the little things that go into shipping a title. Because if not, yes, technically, anybody can self-publish. You get a Steam account, you upload it, you go through that stuff, boom, you're published. Doesn't mean you're successful. So don't do this on your first route. But if you've already gone through this and you're fairly familiar with the process, some of this stuff is going to be the same, but it's going to be different. You still got to build consumer interest in the game. Even more so now, because you're not going to have a publishing, PR and marketing arm to support you. You've got to build your own network of distribution stores, localization, QA, all of these things that go into actually shipping a finished product. You can't gloss over it. We had a client years ago who was putting a game out on iOS, and they sent us the build. We were right at launch, and we said, okay, we got to run it through test. And they're like, no. You don't have to do that. Our lead engineer told us that it didn't have any bugs. And after I got up off the floor laughing, I was like, yeah, we're still going to submit it. We did. It failed the very first check at Apple. So you've got to test all this stuff. No matter what your engineer says, you still need to test it. You're going to have to pitch the game to multiple storefronts. There are stores, and Larry can give you all kinds of details on this because he deals with it every single day. But Steam is going to take most anything. But you go to places like GOG, and they actually curate their system. The same with Epic. It's hard to get in Epic right now. There's a lot of different storefronts out there. I'm always going to encourage you to put your game on as many of them as you can manage. And that not only means, dealing with the people at the storefront, but every store you go on, you're opening up a different, avenue of customer support as well. So you want the game out there in as many places as possible, but you also have to be realistic about what you can actually handle. Then once you're on those stores, you've got to maintain them. Talk to the people on your account manager. You got to make sure you're in these promotions. A lot of work goes into that. So on the consumer interest side, we don't need to rehash it. The stuff in yellow means we already talked about it, earlier. But the important thing at this point is the difference between this scenario and the first one is you've got to keep this up through launch and even 6 months, a year after launch, because you've got to have new content coming out. You got to keep those customers interested. You know, one of my favorite companies that I point to are the Tresay brothers out of Boston. I think Star Traders Frontier has been out for a year and a half, and they've had 160 some updates. And those aren't bug fix updates. Those are content drop updates. And it's two guys and some contractors. They do a phenomenal job of pumping out new content and keeping their customers interested in it. And, you know, they can show you it's not something that takes a team of 20 to do it. It can be done if you do it properly and you think through it. So, you know, you've also going to have to build that professional network of contractors. You've got to really look at all the things that you don't think about when you're making the game. And we've all done this. I've done this. We get so close to a game when it's being made, we kind of forget about stuff. But you're going to have to identify all of those places where you're going to need outsourced support and jot them down initially. But then you're going to have to start going and finding those companies. And it's the same as going and finding a publisher. You want to get localization? There's probably 30 or 40, maybe 50 of good localization companies out there that you can take your game to. And you're going to have to go to talk to them. You're going to have to find the best one. You're going to have to negotiate those deals. You've got to do your research. And, you know, one of the things, whether it's a contractor that you're working with or it's a publisher, I always tell folks, do your own research. Don't go in and say, can you give us some references that you've worked with? Because what happens, put it in your shoes. When you're going and looking for a job and that employer says, give me some references, are you going to give them the references of the boss that you told to F off like 6 months ago? No. You're going to give them the references of your friends and the people that you have a good relationship with. And the same with everybody else. It's human nature. It's not, you know, you can't expect anything more. You've got to go in and see, okay, who has actually worked with these companies, and then go talk to them yourselves and say, how was it? How responsive were they? You know, how do the systems break down? All of this sort of stuff. That's the research that you're going to have to do. You're going to have to manage all that outreach. You're going to have to qualify them. Again, this is where a CRM or even a handy dandy little spreadsheet comes in. You got to select the best option, and then you got to negotiate the agreements. We had a system at one point where we would basically rate these factors with different contractors. And I think this was when we were doing the QA stuff, but we literally gave them a score 1 to 10. And then, you know, looked at the end of the spreadsheet and said, okay, who's got the best average? And that was one of the ways that we did it. But you've got to go, and you can't just go with whoever said, you know, they would give you the cheapest price, because it's very much one of those you get what you pay for type things. But be smart about it. Go out, find the best people, negotiate the contracts, and go on to the next part. So you've got to, when it comes to all the digital stores, hold on, time out. Yes, it's late. I'm drinking a beer. So identify the best stores, you know, for you to maximize your profit. And this is part of the whole thought process that's going to have to be done very early in your game. What kind of game are you making? Who's the demographic? Where does that demographic buy their game? And that's where you're going to start, you know, sorting out where the best place to go is. You can be, yeah, so you got Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, then you've got Steam, Humble, GOG, Stadia. I could probably list the other 15 or 20 that are out there. And the more these streaming things pop up, the more, you know, options you're going to have. But don't do a streaming deal unless they're paying you up front. Just don't. Once you find it, you're going to have to make sure you get accepted on all those platforms. You're going to have to negotiate the agreements. Then you're going to have to, and this is the part that gets a lot of people, you're going to have to manage the various requirements for all of those stores. So like way back in the day, like 10, 15 years ago, when the hidden object games were all the craze, that's what we did at the publishing company I was at, was we made hidden object games. And we would ship those to 20 to 30 different storefronts back then, because everybody was just basically printing money off hidden object games. Every one of those stores had their own requirements for they need a short description that's 10 words and a medium description that's 30 words. But maybe this other group needed a 5-paragraph description. All their screenshot sizes were different. You know, some of them needed videos, some of them didn't. Some of them needed logos on splash screens, some of them didn't. It was absolutely crazy how much stuff we had to manage. So what we did was we sat down and we took every single requirement from every single, you know, different store out there, put it in one package, in one, you know, it started with a document that listed everything, and then it was a giant zip file. And we sent everything to everybody along with the splash screen for their particular store. And that way it manages your sanity and the fact that you didn't send the 800 by 600 logo to one company, but they actually needed the 800 by 800 logo. Don't try to get into that. Sort everything, make one big master plan, and send everybody the master plan. That's what they know, you know, they have what they require, and you've given them a bunch of stuff they may not need to that they can use should they decide to. So, and then once it's all said and done, you've actually got to manage all these relationships. You see the stories every now and then of a developer that pops up and they're like, oh my God, our sales went through the roof. We didn't know we were in the summer Steam sale. That's not the situation you want to be in. You want to know exactly when these sales are coming on Steam. You want to make sure you're getting the placement. You want to make sure you're getting the right discount. Talk to your account manager, build those relationships with them, and check in with them every 2 or 3 weeks. Don't bug them to the point that they stop answering your emails. But, you know, it is your job as the biz dev person at that company to maintain a good relationship with these companies. We had, you know, a situation years ago where we actually got a preferential launch date on a game because we had a good relationship with the account manager, and they had another developer that dropped the ball and didn't get their stuff done in time. And so we benefited from that basically because of our experience. Know when the sales are coming, discount your games accordingly. People track, you know, how often games go on sale and how deeply they go on sale. So if you know, come at that with some arbitrary, well, let's just do 40% this week, that's going to hurt you in the end. You got to have a plan. Set up your bundle deals and streaming deals when the time is right. You know, we had a whole discussion on our Discord the other day. Somebody said, you know, if it's not humble when it comes to a bundle thing, don't do it. That's not entirely true, but, you know, there are a lot of scams out there. And you are going to see situations where, you know, if you give your game to a streaming service, your sales, you know, if you had any at that point, you know, what's left of that long tail is going to be affected on Steam because people are like, well, wait, I've got the Xbox Game Pass and this game was free on there. Why am I going to pay for it on Steam? So you've got to have a plan and manage that as well. And then keep track of this stuff. That's the main thing. You need to understand how your game is doing, how big a sales bump you got from this social media tweet that you did or this post on Reddit or whatever you did. When you're tracking your weekly sales, which you should be, especially if you got multiple, you know, storefronts coming in, you need one big master sheet where you're tracking all your sales. And you can note in there, hey, look, we had like a 20% bump in sales that week. Why? Oh, because we had a GIF on Instagram that went viral that week. If you plot all this stuff, you're going to be set up well to actually figure out, okay, this is working for us and this is not. All right, so we're through 2 scenarios. Questions? Anybody, Larry, before we go to next? Or you may keep chugging?
I think you're really nailed it, Jay.
Oh, that's nice.
People are here nodding a lot.
Tell the truth. It's an empty room, isn't it? You know, I can't tell. I know what you're talking. I know what you're doing.
There's about 20, 30 people here.
I invited all my friends.
100? Oh.
Go ahead, Jay.
All right. So scenario 3. This is typically going to be studios that have, or at least team members who have been around for a while and it'll have some sort of track record, because this is where convincing the publisher that you can actually do this gets really, really important. So scenario 3 is your studio is basically a work for hire studio. And, you know, all of your work coming in, you're not working on anything original. You're just picking up work from, you know, publishers and other developers who have stuff that need outsourced. So this is going to be, I would say, one of the most tedious ones from a biz dev standpoint, because you're always out there, you know, finding something. But you've got to identify all the possible sources of work, not just from publishers, but from other developers. Because a lot of this stuff comes from bigger development studios who have to outsource, you know, their visual effects, or maybe some level design, or you're basically some subsets of the game. Create reusable content to constantly keep your name out there. You know, pitch your services to all these companies. Like I said, not only identifying them, but going and talking to them all the time. This is what we're doing. This is what we're up to. You got anything we can do? Negotiate all these agreements, and then maintain a steady stream of incoming revenue, you know, to keep yourself in business. And number 5 is what gets people, because they take their foot off the gas. It's like, oh, we got 3 contracts coming in. We're good for a little while. Well, if something goes sideways on one of those, you're not good all of a sudden. And so it's tough. I'm not going to lie. It's one of those things where you got to keep enough gas that you've got stuff coming in, but you can't get overloaded as well. But if you do get overloaded, it's a kind of a good thing, but then it can turn into a bad thing. And yeah, it's basically just an exercise in ulcers. But if you're going to go and identify it, there's a ton of people that you've got to talk to. Like I said, over 650 publishers alone. You know, we track 4,000 plus developers. Now, not all of those are going to be, you know, having contract work going out, but there is a huge amount of opportunity out there for you to be tackling. Understand exactly what everybody needs. Do they need just a subset? You know, one of the studios that I worked with, you know, in one of my past lives, basically focused on back-end networking for multiplayer and social games. And that was a very finite skill set that they had, but that's what they did. And they lasted for years doing it. You know, catalog and manage and update that data constantly. That's basically what we've been doing at our studio for the last 2 weeks. Everybody goes home and enjoys their holidays, and we sit back and go, okay, everything has to be updated. We got to make sure we've got everybody's data right, what they're looking for. We cheat a little bit in the fact that in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be sending out our big developer publisher survey. And if you had told me 15 years ago that people would just tell you what they needed through a survey, I would have looked at you like you were crazy, but they will actually do it because you're making their life easier as well. So you've got to not only have all this data, it's got to constantly be updated. The first publisher list that we did was back in August of last year. It was just over 500 studios, publishers. 6 months later, it's at 680 some, and that's not just all editions. That's, you know, a bunch of companies that have gone away, a bunch of people that have popped up. We had a huge spike in the last year of developers who got greenlit for the Switch, who are now turning around and helping other developers publish on Switch, because it's hard now to get in as a developer and self-publish on Nintendo because of the fact that they've got close to 3,000 games on the eStore now. So one of the ways that you're going to make your life easier, and that's all it comes down to when you're doing BD and marketing for a studio, is you need to do everything that you can do to make your life easier. You're going to have enough shit to deal with that you don't need to go back and start recreating stuff all the time. Blog post, video content, podcast. Evergreen content is something that, you know, I can give you a lecture today on this, and if we sit down next year and none of you remember who I am, I can give you this very same lecture and it's still going to be pertinent. I did an article and a lecture at GDC, I think it's like 17 years ago at this point. GDC was in San Jose. It was that long ago. And somebody dug it up on Twitter about a year or two ago. And I went back through the article, and a lot of it, I would say 90% of that stuff that was all about negotiating a contract with the publisher, 90% of that stuff was still 100% accurate. Things like physical distribution, of course, weren't. But if you take the whole section on, you know, physical distribution and regional localization and change it to mean digital storefronts where, you know, you're going out and instead of negotiating a publishing deal in Spain and another one in Italy and another one in the UK, you're negotiating, you know, distribution agreements with Steam and GOG and Green Man and Epic. A lot of it is actually still the same. The names change, but the same. It's that type of stuff. You know, this is how you know, localize a game. This is how you research your publisher to make sure they're a good company. Anything that you can use and reuse, because once you get it out there, it's going to continue to yield searches and your name is going to continue to be out there and you're establishing yourself as an expert. And that's what you want to do. So case studies and testimonials. And this is something that's hard for some people. Once you finish working with somebody and the contract's done, ask them to give you a testimonial on LinkedIn or send them an email and say, hey, look, it would really be helpful if you said a couple of things about how it was to work with us that we can use in our marketing material. One, always tell them it's going to be used in your marketing material. You don't want to be in a situation where you start saying, yeah, so Larry told me we were the greatest people ever to work with. And you put that out there on Twitter and Larry's like, you weren't supposed to tell anybody that because I just told you that to make you feel good. You know, you've got to make sure that you're clear about what you're asking for, but always go and ask, you know, and that's the thing about, you know, development and biz dev in this industry anyway. I'm fortunate. I'm fairly much an extrovert, but I know that I'm in the minority in this industry. A lot of people aren't comfortable going out there and doing it. You just kind of got to get that thick skin and understand that the worst somebody can say is no. And if they say no, go on to the next guy. You know, it's just, you can't let it bother you. But go and get these testimonials once you finish work with somebody because it's going to help you. It builds your reputation. And when you sit down and you do that post-game, you know, what do they call it? Postmortems. I lost my train of thought there. Make sure you capture all of that stuff. Build you a case study. We went to this company and they needed X, Y, Z. And so this is how we did it. This is how we attacked it. This is what we did. And this is how we exceeded their expectations. That is the basis of a fantastic case study. And so when you have another publisher or a developer come to you and they're like, well, have you ever done this before? And you're like, yes, look, here's the case study. This is exactly what we did. This is how we attacked it. And this is how we exceeded it. And so always make sure you keep that stuff. You know, your marketing decks need to always highlight your past projects. Now, make sure if it's something that's going to be going out to the public that you've actually got permission to say that you worked on it, because you're going to be doing some work that you can't talk about, or that sometimes that you're doing sub work for somebody who's already doing sub work for somebody else. And they don't want the whole world to know that, you know, they had to outsource some of that stuff. So whenever you're using logos and, you know, company names, things like that, make sure you've got permission. But at the other end of that, realize that you can say, sometimes you can say we worked with this company without seeing exactly what you did. And so, because 9 times out of 10, that logo on the marketing deck is going to be what everybody looks at. They're not going to go into deep detail. They're going to go, oh, you worked with EA, or oh, you worked with Ubi, or, you know, whoever it may be. Make sure you've got permission. Make sure you can back up what you did. But this is not an area where you want to step on somebody's toes. It will come back to bite you later if you do. So, you know, like when you're doing
that bathroom was clean when I got done with it, Jay.
What's that?
Talking about my outsourcing work, and that bathroom was clean when I got done with it.
Exactly. I signed that piece of paper by the door. See, it was clean. You know, this is just like going out and pitching your game to publishers, except the difference is it's never going to end. You know, if you're in this situation and you're constantly looking for contract work, you know, that sort of stuff, you need to be touching base with everybody who's a viable client at least once every quarter. So do the math and figure out how many people you're talking to a week, but that's what you need to be doing. So it goes email outreach, you know, consistent social media post, trade show attendance. So Victor, about your question about the trade shows, you can absolutely go to too many of them. The downside of it is a lot of times you're not going to realize it until you've already gone to too many of them. that's the situation that I found myself in 2017. That's the reason we have Indie Game Business now. I went to so many conferences, spent so much time out of the office, money on flights and hotels, time away from my family. At the end of 2017, I was like, I'm not doing it next year. And in 2018, I didn't go to a single show. I stayed at the office, at home, with my family all year long, took that entire marketing budget and started the Indie Game Business, segment of the world. So you need to sit down and look at each one of those shows that you're talking about, figure out who your customer is going to be there. Some shows are better for business, some are better for consumers. If you're going to self-publish in your scenario too, yes, you need to be at PAX. You need to be at DreamHack. You need to be getting in front of, the actual players. And more importantly, you need to be in locations where you can get in front of streamers. If you're going and you're in situation 3, situation 1, that's where you need to be at GDC or Pocket Gamer or Game Daily Connect, the shows that are more business oriented. So sit down and look at each one of those shows you're going to and understand what your primary goal for that show is going to be, who's going to be at that show, and use that as a basis of saying, okay, this is worth going to and this isn't. Because if you go to all of those shows that you listed, you're going to go crazy. I can't recommend you go to all of them, but sit down and say, these are the ones that are going to make sense for the situation that we're in, and these are the ones that we're going to get the most benefit out of, and focus on them. So, just like everything else, you're going to have to, once you get all these deals in place and deals coming in, you're going to have to negotiate. You're going to have to make sure that relationship is, like I said, it's a partnership. It's a fair deal. Don't go in and try to win it, because that's going to bite you. Make sure, in terms of like little things that you can put in the contract, make sure you can talk about the work that you did, even if it's just saying, hey, we did some work for Night Dive. You're not saying what you did, but you can say that you did some work. And if they call Night Dive, Larry's going to go, yeah, I know them. They did some work for us. Plan for delays and clearly define your approval process. This is where stuff gets sideways, and it's with contract work and it's with licenses as well. If you don't factor, approval processes into your agreements, you could go 2 months and not get a milestone payment, or 3 months because that milestone hasn't been approved. And then once they finally get around to approving it, they don't have to pay you until 45 or 60 days after they approve it. Make sure all of this stuff is, outlined in that agreement, and you've got a clear path and you factored it into your budget as well. Make sure your budgets are realistic and provide you with a cushion. And that's going to bleed into scenario 4 here. If you don't have any backup or any cushion while you're doing this project, and one of these milestones slips, or, you got a delay in approval processes or whatever it is, you're going to be cash strapped. You're going to have people who aren't getting paid. And in this industry, when people aren't getting paid, they don't stick around. At least they shouldn't. I know a lot of them do, but they shouldn't. And then, basically, maintain a steady revenue stream. And this is where I talked about, it's hard. There's no simple way of figuring this out. You always have to be talking to everybody. You've got to constantly update your marketing, put your testimonials out there, post stuff on LinkedIn. It's like, hey, we just finished this project with so-and-so. It's less about bragging about the job that you did. And a lot of times it's just simply letting the world know you still exist. We would go to shows. I talked to a developer today, and he talked about all the shows they go to. And we were, going back and forth on, are these shows worth it or are they not? And I said, a lot of times we go to a conference, and it's not necessarily about booking a bunch of meetings for, new work. It's more about, what we call waving the flag. It's like, we're here, we're still alive, we're still doing work. If you need us, call us. But, being seen in the industry, whether it's, physically at a conference, or if it's in social media or Discord or a podcast, wherever it is, it makes people know that you're still alive, you're still doing work, and, you're still establishing yourself as that expert in the industry. And, be careful not to overbook or underbook your team. It's a very fine line. And I'll leave it at that, because there's no There's no easy way to figure it out. You know, we've had deals that we thought were going to happen quick. They took 6 months to do. And then 2 weeks later, you know, we had a deal come through in a matter of days that we didn't expect. It's one of those things that we call that, you know, that section A about, you know, talking to everybody every 3 months. That's the basic blocking and tackling, you know, and if you're doing that and you're doing it correctly, things will generally work out unless you've been like completely blacklisted because you completely screwed up a couple of projects, things like that. Don't, you know, there's only so much you can do at that point. But if you're doing all the core stuff, you'll get a cadence going. You'll get an understanding of it. And yeah, you'll have days where it's like, oh my God, we have too much work coming in. And then you'll have days where you're like, oh my God, we have no work coming in. I mean, for the consulting business, Q4 is our worst quarter ever. It is every single year because people are like, yeah, we don't need anything right now. There aren't as many shows. Publishers aren't looking at as many games anyway. The industry kind of like trickles down. But then, you know, now for the next 3 months, we're running around like chickens with our heads cut off because everybody's getting ready for GDC. Everybody's back. It's like all of a sudden, oh, I have a new budget. I need a game pipeline. I need, you know, X, Y, and Z. It's one of those things that you've just got to get a feel for, but you can't ever stop. You know, you can't ever sit back and go, oh, we have 3 projects going on. We're good. Because those projects can end in a heartbeat. You know, somebody has a bad stock day, CEO changes. They're like, oh, well, we're deciding we're not going to do multiplayer games anymore. And all of a sudden your project's gone. And, you know, if you don't have something lined up, you're going to be, you know, running around thrashing, trying to find something. So, all right, final scenario. And this is the dangerous one. This is what I call the hamster wheel. Your studio is working on contract development projects while you're building your own game. It is probably one of the most common scenarios we see, and it's the most dangerous because you get in a situation where if you don't plan for that contract work properly, then you're not going to have any budget left over to do your original game. And then if you start working on that original game too much, you don't have people doing the contract work, your clients aren't happy, and they start, you know, not paying you. It's basically take all the stress from the other 3 scenarios and put them together, and then you have scenario 4. So, like I said, yellow stuff is stuff we've already covered, so we're not going to go into in-depth with it, but you got to identify all those publishers, all the developers. You got to find the people for your game. You got to build the consumer interest. You got to build the professional interest. You got to create that content. The part that's different is now you're pitching your game as you're looking for contract work. So you may be going to a publisher and going, hey, you know, do you have any work that you need done? And by the way, here's this original game that we're working on. That is actually the best way to do it. So our clients that, you know, live in scenario 4 where they're constantly just looking for, you know, contract work, we require them to have some sort of original IP that we can pitch as well, because that opens a lot of doors. A lot of deals that I've done over the years came from sending an original project to a publisher, and the publisher looking at it and going, this game isn't for us, but based on what I see, here's a project that we need help with. Can you do that? And so it gets harder, but at the same time, being able to pitch multiple things to a publisher helps you in the end. So, you know, and like we said, you still have to negotiate all of it. You still have to keep a steady stream of oncoming revenue. All of that said, that scenario is very dangerous. My first startup went because of that very same scenario. You've got to be very careful because once you're on that hamster wheel of doing contract work, it's very, very difficult to get off of it. And so, you know, the postmortem of my first company that I started was we did contract work for Disney, Nickelodeon, National Geographic. And then we got to the point where we're like, okay, we can do something original. We did our first original game and it went really well. And we're like, okay, maybe we can take the foot off the pedal a little bit on the contract development side. And we did. And then the next 2 games that we made completely flopped. And at that point, there was nothing left. You know, we didn't have contract work coming in because we had focused on, you know, the original content. We didn't have any more original content because we didn't have any money to make it, you know. So it's a dangerous scenario to be in, and you just have to be able to manage it properly. And it takes years of experience to do it. But even when at that point, I had been in the industry for a decade, and we still tube the company. So you just have to realize that's part of it. But you got to constantly do that basic stuff that we talked about. And then, you know, you're going to be in the best position possible. So just as the shameless plug slide, you know, this is stuff that we do for free for any of you that are out there. We've got the podcast. That list of publishers is now live. Larry can send it to you, or you can just grab it, download it yourself. We've got webinars that you can, you know, listen in on. We do 2 a month. And then we've got a giant Discord server that, you know, has now got 700 companies on it, much to my shock and surprise and thankfulness, but yeah, still shock and surprise. And then there's my email address. So that's the presentation. Let's see is there another slide? There's not another slide. I'm ready for questions.
We couldn't take any more. Jay, I see you've got somebody asking you on the chat.
Chat. Where's my chat? Hold on.
Down there at the bottom.
Yeah, but you know, your screen doesn't look like my screen. Hold on a second.
All right, no worries. Hey, that was really good. First of all, I had to put down the microphone because I'm not talented enough to clap with one hand. Questions?
Hello?
I'm here. Is there a question?
Yeah. I have 2 questions. I think question number 1 is directed to I think the second format that you mentioned when you said about outreaching to multiple storefronts. In your experience, is it good to like focus on one distributor as maybe your primary focus, or is it like, or is shotgunning everything and seeing what works is the best way? I just want to know.
Due to simple math, you're going to be, if you're on the PC side, you're going to be concentrated on Steam initially. I mean, they're the 800-pound gorilla. They still are. Epic is going to be a close second, I would say, at this point. Even more so if you can get an Epic grant, but they're harder to get into. What we do is we approach the digital stores the same way we approach publishers. And so for each project, we make basically a tier list. Tier 1 is going to be, you know, Steam, Epic, maybe Humble. Larry's probably got a little more data on this than I do. But then you've got your tier 2, you know, stores, and then your tier 3 opportunities. And so we attack each one in order. But if you're doing a PC game, yeah, Epic, I mean, Steam is going to be number 1 just simply because that's where they still have the majority of the market share. But don't overlook things like the Microsoft Store, because especially with Game Pass and a lot of the other stuff, they're moving up a little bit. But you know, you're always going to aim at Steam, but you can't ever just leave it at that. You need these other stores to help balance out that long tail in the end.
Just to quickly amplify Jay's answer. So yeah, your majority of your sales are probably going to come through Steam, and everybody accepts Steam codes. But Steam will never outwardly market your game for you. Steam isn't going to tell their billions of customers that your game is on there now. Humble, in contrast, has a mailing list of 800,000 people.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And so you see all these debates now on, you know, whether or not Steam's 30% is justified. The first thing I would bring up is, you know, 10, 15 years ago when we were doing hidden object games, Big Fish and Reel and all of those sites that were just, like I said, printing money, they took 70% and the developer got 30%. So Steam's 30% was, you know, a great deal when they came along, but it was also kind of tempered with the fact that when you were new, you were going to be on that new release list for days, maybe even a week. And now you're on it for like 6 hours, you know, so they're still the one you're going to go to because that's where the people are. But you know, the humble example is a fantastic, you know, reason. You know, Steam's not going to go and promote you. The only promotion you're going to get through Steam is through the wish list that you drive people to. And then when you launch, when you do a discount, you know, you'll send everybody an email. But yeah, aim at Steam for PC, but don't neglect the rest of these stores because you need them.
Get to the question.
Yes, I have a second question. My second question is kind of related to, I think, the last point that you mentioned, or at least your story about with the startup. I wanted to know, is there a way to know if an original idea is going to yield results? As a person with experience in the business side, can you like take a look at an idea and say, oh, that's going to, through reasonable deduction and probably statistics, you can say, oh, this can do this well, versus a project like that can do so and so.
So an idea is worth less than this bottle of Cold Mountain that I have with me right now. An idea isn't going to get you anywhere. It's all about the execution. Now, can we take a look at a demo and say, okay, you know, is there a range of what the opportunities are? Yes. And that's something that you need to be doing with your game anyway. You need to be looking at data from Steam Spy, from, you know, postmortems that other developers do. This used to be really easy because we would have access to MPD data back before digital happened. And with the exception of Walmart, it told you exactly how many copies of Quake 2 sold in Best Buy that week. And you could sit down and say, okay, look, if we have a first-person shooter that's of this level of quality and it goes out this time of year, we could reasonably guess the unit sales that came from it. Now, because all that data is held privately and people have to do fancy algorithms and guesstimate it, it's harder to do that. Nielsen bought Super Data. So it's a little easier on the mobile side because there's so many companies that aggregate that data. It's expensive to get it, but you can get it. But what you need to do is sit down and look at your game and be realistic. Don't sit there and say, we're making a farming sim and we're going to use Stardew Valley as our, you know, case point to see how many sales we're going to get, because those are anomalies and you can't factor that in as an indie dev. But you can sit down, look at Steam Spy. I can do some fancy stuff here. Drag this over here. Just ignore the part where I was trying to Google up spreadsheet stuff today. I did code for the first time in 20 years today. All right, so come on now. I'm going to show you real quick what you can do on Steam Spy if you're looking to figure out.
Just real quick, in terms of predictability.
Yep.
I'm trying to remember the publisher, but the first Kim Kardashian mobile game.
Oh my God, Glue.
Glue Mobile. The first Kim Kardashian game doubled their stock price. Second Kim Kardashian game, which was basically a clone of the first one, pretty much drove them close to bankruptcy. So
Larry, give me a decent indie game that came out recently, off the top of your head.
Use Hades over there.
All right, so keep in mind, I give Sergey money every month on Patreon, so I've got a little deeper access than what you have if you just get a free account. But you go on Steam Spy, you can look and say, all right, here's genres that you can check. So it's an early access RPG, action RPG. This will tell you, these numbers aren't, you know, 100% accurate, but they don't have to be. What you're looking for is trends, basically. But, you know, this is where it's going to show you how many owners it has, you know, and this is very important when it comes down to looking at publishers as well. Steam Spy will tell you their Twitch stats, you know, for a game. But what you want to do is go through, pick realistic games that are similar to yours and start looking at this data. And if it's a market that's oversaturated, you need to be careful. But if it's something that is undersaturated, you can do very well with it. Frankly, I made a lot of money off niche games over the years, but use things like Steam Spy and, any kind of analytics that you can get your hands on to justify your game. It's not always a gut reaction anymore. I mean, I can look at a demo and go, okay, this has got promise, but at the level of an idea, you can't, because ideas don't get very far in the industry.
Thank you.
What else have we got? Any other questions? I'm going to make both the presentation and Jay's publisher list has already been posted onto the Meetup group. You can download it from there. That is gold. Jay, thank you very much. This was absolutely great.
Dude, my pleasure. And if any of you want to talk later, like I said, the easiest way, there's my email address, but the easiest way to get me is on our Discord server. So just pop over there, introduce yourself. We'll get you set up. And it's not only me, but the vast majority of the experts that we've had on the podcast are there. We've got a wonderful community of people who will, give you real, honest to God feedback on stuff, not just sit there and tell you your game's pretty.
Jay's podcasts are always worth listening to. He's had some great guests. Also, besides the great guests I was on there, but in terms of great guests, Emily's been a guest on there. So, Jay, again, thank you so much.
Hey, Emily.
Great, man.
All right, man. My pleasure.
I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks.
All right. Y'all have a good night.
One quick thing that Jay discussed that you guys should probably know about. You know what segments are? All right, so you can slice up when you look at a lot of data, slice it up in